Tosches, a fare thee well. After the cute little koala had finished his sad tale of Aussie tourism gone amok, Roger Grimsby, who's another local jerk, Roger Grimsby took the mic. A horny-as-heck colleague of MT who had long longed for her tannish goodies, Roger snidely groaned, "Look what women's lib has given us." But secretly, he just wanted to throttle this Frankie, but good. Imagine some son of a bitch from off the goddamn streets copping the moisture he hadn't even managed to sniff of in all these years. The next day, each of the three local rags covered the incident in its own inimitable fashion. In bold-faced caps, the news declared, "Melba Muck muzzled." While the Post's headline read, "The Tolliver case, First Amendment infringement?" ? The Times, which lined the imagine a town which has three papers, huh? The Times, which lined the cat boxes of only the upper crustiest of homes, relegated it to page 3, quote, "Local news figure dismissed over aired comments." Those who could read, read. What they read, though, was mostly of Melba, who, under sedation, declined further comment. Her alleged paramour received no more mention than any Tom, Dick, or Harry could have expected just from boogieing one of the 4 million-plus gal holes in NYC. So much for our ever-inquisitive Fourth Estate. But then came what we now know as Big Wednesday, a scant 2 days a.m. after Melba, the day the shit really hit the media fan. In the morning edition of the Times, on page 27, an episode was reported of the sordid sort such a highfalutin sheet wouldn't normally have printed on page 18,000. But a bigwig was involved, Saul Urenstein, chief of sanitation for Co-op City up in the Bronx. Saul had been found dangling from the shower head in the master bedroom crapper, the army belt around his throat, straining to support his 268 pounds. Fat guy. According to the Times, the note pinned to his chest simply read, quote, "She, vernacular for copulated with, Frankie." Police speculated that the she in question might very well be Urenstein's 29-year-old wife, Bernice, who could not be reached for questioning. Then, in the entertainment section of the afternoon's Post, an interview with actress Sally Field revealed the demise of her short-lived romance with popular leading man Burt Reynolds. Miss Field, in town on a shopping spree, was quoted as saying, quote, "A fabulous new beau had entered her life." Quote, "I'm embarrassed to say I have no idea what his whole entire name is. I just know him as Frankie. But names aren't really important with a man who's such a phenomenal lover." In parentheses, liberal tabs like the Post are fond of charming little euphemisms like that, leaving absolutely nothing to the reader's imagination while maintaining their status as a class aberration. Like, for instance, the Post, like in 1972 or something, when there were like certain candy books were coming out, there was somebody wrote about how JFK would not give up a girlfriend until he'd had her all three ways, and the Post printed that. Like, this was his paper. This is where Eleanor Roosevelt and Jackie Robinson once had columns. And when they printed these things about JFK, you knew that they would print anything. And this was before the Australian bought the thing. What's that guy's name? Australian? Murdoch, yeah. Before it became a racing sheet. Then, in the entertainment section of that, I'd already read that. At that point, okay, we've got Sally Urenstein and we've got Sally Field. At that point, you'd have thought some enterprising Clark Kent or Lois Lane would have been right on top of things in the 2 and 2 department. But no, it was close to several hours before Mike McGovern. Here's this guy who hung out in the Bells of Hell. He was this guy who he'd been writing for the news which is like lower than the Herald Examiner, lower than the Valley news and green sheet, currently called the Valley News or the Daily News or something. It was like just junk. And Mike McGovern used to write about fires for them and all this junk. And because he was in the union, he was like a real drunk, and they never could fire him. And he was this like hipster who hung out in the bells of hell. And they finally put him on rewrites of fire reports, because how else you had to make him suffer because they couldn't fire him. So, and in fact, in Nick Tosches' book Country, he dedicates it to Mike McGovern, because he regarded him as a very honorable reporter of fires. So we have Mike McGovern here. It was close to several hours before Mike McGovern did the addition of 2 + 2 for us at the night desk of the news. Drunk as usual, he still had the wherewithal to peruse the competition for a paraphrasable item or two. He perused with curiosity the Sally item. He'd always wanted to bang that cutie himself. The dreamer's dream. Then, knocking over his half-empty fifth of Carstairs, like there are certain like brands, that Calvert's Carstairs, these are the brands that like Jerry Lee Lewis would drink, but not us. He knocks over his Carstairs. He used the Times to mop up the mess. Voila! On page 27 lay the exposed. Well, blah blah. It's a typo here. Something about on page 27, he sees the Sally thing or the Sally Urenstein thing in the rot gut damp. If he'd been Plato or Aristotle, he'd have yelled Eureka. Instead, he phoned up his drinking buddy Jimmy Breslin at O'Shaughnessy's Bar and Grill over in Queens, and let the fatso in on the scoop of at least the week. Jimbo's Pulitzer alarm went off like a 3-alarmer, but doubt filled his head almost as quick. With a history of dupehood going back to the 1966 mayoralty elections, where Norman Mailer had actually conned him into service as his mayoral running mate on the Let's Make New York City the 51st state ticket. This is true. Norman Mailer and Jimmy Breslin got 5% of the vote. It was like Norman Mailer was running himself, and he needed somebody to run with, and he got Jimmy Breslin. Nobody here's read Jimmy Breslin? Jimmy Breslin is this guy. He's this Irish guy who wrote this daily column about nothing. Sometimes he wrote about crime. Sometimes he wrote about poverty. Sometimes he wrote about heroin. He just wrote this crap. And he also wrote The Guy Who Didn't Shoot Straight. Is that the name? What's the name? Couldn't Shoot Straight? All right. Yeah? Okay. Yeah? It's a good book? Yeah. Okay, so his Pulitzer alarm went off like a 3-alarmer. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Ah, what the hay, he exclaimed, staggering to the back room to type out one draft, a column entitled, Frankie is Ranky. One epidemic no vaccine can stop. Like, for instance, he write, like if anytime a criminal got murdered, he writes some column, he'd somehow find out, like, exactly why it happened. And he writes some, give you a little bit of information, but so what, Blah, blah, blah. Frankie's Ranky, one epidemic no vaccine can stop. Here he goes. Up in Co-op City, he began, where Bronxonians have valiantly sought escape from the torment of encroaching urban blight. The trash cans are especially full this morning. Yesterday's eggshells and sardine tins festering under the feisty springtime sun. The man residents have come to revere as Daddy Garbage will not be making his rounds today. This is Sally Urenstein. Or any other day. An out-of-towner known only as Mr. Frankie, a guy who has never attended an overcrowded junior high or viewed a hungry rat gnaw at the face of a dying junkie, has seen to that. He paused. Yeah, the fucking Pulitzer, he told himself, sure as a bear shits in the woods. Maybe, Jim, just maybe, you do have a way with words and all that. But right now, Mr. B, right this sec, as your finger hits the shift key, Your highly cherished Mrs. B is being fingered as well. You guessed it, by Mr. Frankie. Ain't life funny? Okay, now we get to, this is like a serious title for this chapter. Chapter 5. A nation of cuckolds, a nation of sluts. News has always traveled fast. The so-called electronic age allowed it to travel even faster. But even the fastest electrons in America were scarcely able to keep up with the odious exploits of Frankie in the weeks that followed. Still in New York, he fucked Greta Garbo, who promptly announced her long-awaited return to the silver screen. I want to be in porn. And Randall High, who you know, Randall, I sent this to him, and he passed it on to in some gay bar cohorts in Lexington, Kentucky, who really enjoyed that one. What the heck? Moving on to Chicago, he planted his heinous seed in the orifices of Gloria Daly, wife of Mayor. See, like, here's this guy. He's not an ageist, you know. Wife of Mayor Richard Daly, and 6 Northwestern co-eds attending a performance by the Second City Review. Next, if the consensus reconstruction of the alleged sequence is to be believed, he stopped briefly in Lincoln, Nebraska to knock up Dick Cavett's mom. Outbreaks of Frankie were then reported in Tallahassee, a vacationing Bess Myerson, Nashville, country western star Loretta Lynn, Atlanta, respected civil rights widow Coretta King, Butte, Montana, Carla Bley on tour with her latest jazz, quote, ensemble. Phoenix, Arnold Palmer's better half Winnie, in town, this is her real name, in town with her husband for the Andy Williams Desert Classic. Aspen, Andy's estranged squaw, Claudine Longet, until then happily love-nesting it with skier Spider Savage. So we know that Frankie triggered that. Spokane, Dame Margot Fontaine, guest hoofing with the Seattle Ballet, and of course Los Angeles, the fabled city of sin. Established starlets Yvette Mimieux, Anjanette Comer, and Lauren Bacall. TV weather gal Kelly Lang. She was like, when we wrote this, Kelly Lang was still doing the weather, and then she became like an anchor person or something, and then got dumped. I don't think she's been heard from since about. She's still around? I don't watch the news. But anyway, okay, yeah, she did? Yeah? Okay, but miraculously, the great state of Texas was totally bypassed. Knock on woods, Longhorns. Knock on wood, Longhorns. Dear Abby's opening tearjerker of May 27th was signed, quote, Frankied. My loving bride of 19 years has done it with Frankie and is packing her bags. I know these are liberated times, and God knows we both consider having affairs. But what about our 7 children, aged 8 to 17? Quote, the poor sap should have left well enough alone. Miss Van Buren's reply, well-intentioned as it was, could only have rubbed salt in his wounds. Quote, dear Frankied, so your wife has gone and done it with Frankie. Big deal. I have recently been intimate with Frankie myself. And you don't see me abandoning the home fires, do you? Liberated, shriberated. Understanding is still the key. I suggest you let her date Frankie one night a week. For instance, tonight you play poker with the fellows. As to your children, perhaps you have a daughter or 2 already old enough to be broken in by a stick man who really knows how. The one and only Frankie. The reaction to all this hubbub was, in a word, mixed. Syndicated conservative William F. Buckley considered the whole thing no more than an update of the James Bond phenomenon of the 60s. Quote, like all irritating fads, it will pass. Pinko's scribe Nat Hentoff called it a CIA plot. What better way to undermine the meaningful breakthroughs in American socio-sexual behavior than to give headlines to gratuitous wife plunking? Billy Graham called Frankie, quote, Satan's most insidious earthly representative since Stalin. His more relaxed cohort in godly manners, Garner Ted Armstrong, merely noted that, quote, biblical epics have had a habit of reasserting themselves in our time. If Lot could lay with his children, then why not Frankie with ours? Dr. Joyce Brothers, who went to my high school, Far Rockaway High, Dr. Joyce Brothers decried the tendency to mass hysteria, stating that Frankie was but, quote, the latest occasion for American women to cry out their burning need for love and submission, although not necessarily in that order. You know, like it ain't atrophied from centuries of just passing water and pushing it up the Mrs. Bone-Dry Gazula 3 nights a month, end quote. Like we said, mixed. Nor did the response of the guy or gal in the street towards things Frankie follow any party line tied strictly to their species of meat. Macho males, quote around the macho males gave their seal of approval to this all-time stud's masculine rampage, while others, sissies mostly, marked the man as bad PR for their gender. Some daring types dared to pose as Frankies themselves with limited success, while the less daring condemned, quote, the challenger Frankie as a bit much to emulate in this here day and age. Many rushed to shrinks with the dreaded word impotence on their lips, whilst towel-head shaman Maharishi Mahesh Yogi marketed the simple mantra, I am Frankie, as a guaranteed aid to the attainment of erection. Members of mainstream women's groups protested their sex's wholesale refusal to demand something from Frankie in return. Quote, how can so many among us give ourselves to this unrepentant bachelor for anything less than a magnum of Chanel No. 5, let alone a zircon on the appropriate finger? This is like, I don't know, what is a mainstream female group? I don't know what that means. Hardline feminists, on the other hand, were split into 3 major camps, those committed to each dame's inalienable right to spread him for whomever, be it Frankie or Joseph Zilch, semicolon. Those thoroughly disgusted with yet the latest overstatement in the arrogance of Wazoo, semicolon. Those who had lain with Frankie. Unaffiliated females of all persuasions other than Jasper. See, this is his term, like Bob Merlis, who works for Warner Brothers Records, he claims that a southern USA term for lesbian is Jasper. And once upon a time, I went to a country western convention in Tulsa, and this guy who had played Goober on Gomer Pyle, not Gomer, but Goober, I don't remember his name. He told some story about a guy named Sappo who had lived in Jasper, Alabama. So I have a feeling he must have gone to college and that, this was an actual term. So I have females of all persuasions other than Jasper waited in alleyways, hallways, doorways, and train depots, ... for Frank. The changes inflicted by Frankie upon the very fabric of contemporary U.S. life could not be denied. Divorce rates were soaring, with lawyers handling Frankie-related cases, many manufactured, most presumably for real, having a field day. Alcohol abuse was steeply on the rise, as bars from coast to coast substituted Frankie hours for the customary happy hour. The law enforcement folks reported a sharp increase in incidents of wife abuse as terminal monogamists galore fearing a loss of hard-earned pelt, that's jargon too, pummeled more than a few slumber mates for merely sighing Frankie's name. Some accused pummelers were apparently named Frankie themselves, but paranoia occasionally makes second-guessers of us all, even in the land of the free, the home of the brave. To make a long story almost not as long, the ultimate icing on this grimy, soiled cake was applied on June 16th when Johnny Carson, back from a 3-week vacation in Bora Bora, tried out his very first Frankie joke. This is 1975. You must have read the Bicentennial Committee is looking for something to place above the American flag during the bicentennial. Well, how about Frankie? He's already been on top of everything else. As with all of Johnny's attempts at humor, it went over like a lead balloon. But Johnny's stamp had at last made the whole nightmare official. The Frankie craze was, alas, here to stay. And I guess I got time to read the last chapter. And I'll read it. Frankie speaks. This is chapter 6. There's a lot of chapters. Few men worthy of the name can fail to remember exactly where they were on December 7th, 1941, the moment they heard that the Yellows had bombed Pearl Harbor, or on November 22nd, 1963, when the news rang out that J.F. Kennedy's brains, when the news ran out about J.F. Kennedy's brains getting spilled by a crackerjack assassin's murderous bullet. As dry runs for the recollective juices, these two dates were not half bad. You might even call them excellent. Excellent setups for the, quote, big one. The one no man of penis is likely to ever forget. July 6, 1975, a day that, as Walter Cronkite so grandly put it, will long live on in infamy. It seemed that every transistor in America was blaring Tony Orlando's "You Fucked Frankie." Melva Tolliver's successful suit against ABC, which had quickly led to the FCC's notorious piss-fuck cunt decision, had been hailed by her attorney, F. Lee Bailey, as, quote, the most significant step in her life toward a full realization of the American ideal of free speech. But in light of the musical trend it had instantly spawned, many saw it as little more than a revolting first step in the willy-nilly legitimization of free filth. Nuclear family supporters en masse forbade their young ones from purchasing the new Frankie sides. Others expressed their distaste in a more violent manner. One Huspo, New York widower. Huspo is this town like 1971, Grover Lewis or somebody was editing some section of Rolling Stone, and they were doing a travel section, and he said, why don't you do a section about some place that doesn't exist? So I made up this place, Huspo, New York, and it had I looked at the prices of eggs and things like that, and butter, and it had this, all I wrote was that I listed the prices of everything, and it was exactly half of what it was anywhere else. You might want to move to Huspo, New York. Right? One Huspo, New York widower it was in the same issue of Rolling Stone where they had the Mel Lyman, the big major Mel Lyman piece. You might have it in your collection. One Huspo, New York widower was arrested and charged with the attempted murder of Big Apple DJ William B. Williams. This is before SCTV had John Candy playing William B. Williams. William B. Williams was this guy who, in 1963, I saw Ray Charles at the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, and he was the DJ who was somehow plugged into that. He was the MC, and he said these things like, well, we've heard many bands called the Earwaxes and the Broken Glasses and Life Stinks, but here is a man of art. This is how he introduced Ray Charles. Apple DJ William B. Williams, whose response was almost stoical, quote, in a way, I'm not mad at the guy, the graying radio hepcat was quoted as saying. I don't like these Frankie records any more than he does, and I certainly agree about the particular one he singled out, that Peter Frampton abomination about Frankie taking pleasures with his wife. The irony of it is that the man's wife is safely dead and gone, and I can't understand his but I can understand his twisted grief. But what am I to do? The boss gives me my playlist, and I do my job. Just like I did my job back in the 50s when they told me to play that cradle robber, Jerry Lee Lewis. See, there's actually, in New York, there's still DJs who come from the pre-rock days who still have gigs playing this junk. And they play Michael Jackson and all this stuff. And they pull in 30,000 a year or something. And William B. Used to play. I remember he played Tony Bennett. He was very happy about I Left My Heart in San Francisco. That it was a real landmark. Blah blah blah. Jerry Lee Lewis. The thing of it is, and I really mean this, we disc jocks could probably have banded together and saved the world from the rock and roll menace by '59 at the latest. But I'm sorry to say we missed our cue. Now this Frankie character, he's got to be the biggest evil since Yasser Arafat. This was William B., whatever his real name is, Levenstein or something, Jewish person. Biggest evil since Yasser Arafat. Whereas the last chapter, Billy Graham talks about Stalin. But the music he's generated is only an unfortunate symptom. What can I say? It's my job to play it. Well, meanwhile, men are fighting against men, and I've been an innocent near victim of that. Instead of joining together against Frankie, whoever the devil he is. In the meantime, if you want symptomatic relief, take an Excedrin. I really mean that. When John Candy does that, it's always like he slaps his knee. Whatever he does, it's like, I love you, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? The youth of America, however, took no Excedrin. Just as they had for the mashed potatoes and heavy metal, they wiggle their hips to the Frankie beat. Yes, it was 3:05 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, July 6th, when WNBC, New York City's hottest rock and roll stations, like every one of these stations that used to do stock market reports became rock stations, abruptly broke away from its ninth broadcast of the day of You Fuck Frankie. A voice, tensed with urgency, spoke the following words. This is a bulletin. We have just received word that Frankie has at last personally made his existence known. This is the Frankie who has been responsible for the current sexual spree that has wrought havoc throughout the country. The nature of Frankie's revelation is not yet clear, but informed sources assure us that this is not a hoax. We repeat, Frankie has spoken. We now return to our regular program. Women across the vast metropolis clutched their stomachs with damp, concupiscent hands. Nick wrote this. I don't know that word. Men swallowed hard. Newspapers rushed to the nearest phones. Within minutes, there were similar bulletins throughout the land. Tens of millions sat glued to their dials. In towns without all news stations, panicky yokels were forced to endure the onslaught of one Frankie tune after another, as men just doing their job fueled the palpitation with no let-up or pity. Finally, at 4:30 Eastern Daylight Time, came further details more unsettling than could have been imagined. It was revealed that, in the course of his southeastern swing, Frankie had fornicated with Nora Ephron, wife of Carl Bernstein, celebrated reporter for the Washington Post. Although an esteemed journalist in her own right, Ms. Ephron deemed it unfitting to blow by blow the intimate details of their, quote, sacred tryst. As she was later to tell Tom Snyder, quote, it was too beautiful a thing to consider turning into inky metaphors. Nora, however, did tell hubby of her experience. She felt they had that kind of marriage. And Bernstein, thinly veiling his informant wife's identity under the moniker Deep Frankie, dutifully recorded his bride's disclosure. He later confessed that tears fell profusely upon the keyboard of his Smith Corona as he began to peg out the first Deep Frankie report. Deep Frankie, wrote the broken Bernstein, looked into the eyes of her sinful lover. One question overwhelmed her, and she begged him to answer it. "Who are you?" she asked, teetering at the brink of her 8th climax of the hour. He was silent for many moments. Then, as the lava began to gush from his organ into hers, polluting irrevocably what had once been good, had once been pure, had once cooked ginger duckling for her husband who had thought the world of her, he spoke. "I am Frankie. Frankie am I and always was. Frankie am I to ever be. I have lain with your mother, and her mother before her, and all mothers and all of their tribe, wives and sisters and daughters. Before ever Dante shared his measly manhood with Beatrice, I had had her, and her mother before that, and Dante's mother as well, and his father's mother, and her mother, and all sisters and daughters and wives thereof. Before the flood was I, Noah's mater familias had I, and all women that then and evermore. I am Frankie. Now roll over, whore and wife of another, roll over before I cleave thee in twain with my mighty stalk and staff." As she rolled over in abject abeyance, deep Frankie posed another breathy interrogative, seeking a loftier degree of clarity. Why are you here, Frankie, in America in 1975? "I am here to fuck your mom." Deep Frankie swooned. Frankie pumped. There were no more questions, no more answers, only gutter expletives my reportorial ethos demands I delete. Frankie had spoken.